Shalom Aleichem. I'm way ahead of myself. We're in Pashas Koach. We're in Pashas Chukas. And I'm learning a Ma'amarim Aileh Masei. From Tafshin Lamed Vav, which is our year. We got 7 Ma'amarim left to do at the end of the year, and 2 Ma'amarim from the beginning of Tishrei, from Tafshin Lamed Vav, which I'm hoping to do as I've done the last few years, with the last couple of Ma'amarim of El Tafshin Lamed Hey, because frequently the Rebbe segues from the end of the year into the year. I discovered this probably in Tafshin Mem Aleph, when I learned one Ma'amir, then I went back and at the end of the year learned the last Ma'amir, and I realized how it's connected to the Ma'amir of Rosh Hashanah. So that's what we're doing. I'm ahead of myself. I'm sorry. It's the summer and I have things that I wish to cover. So you'll learn this Ma'amir whenever you learn it. It's Ma'amir of Masei, and I'm teaching it now. Now in Tafshin Lamed Vav, the Rebbe said 2 Ma'amarim of Masei. Both of them are short, 4 amudim, a little less, a little more. And one was said on a Thursday night, and one was said on Shabbos. Shabbos was Shabbos Mevarchim of Menachemov, and Thursday night with the Shchedesh. The Rebbe came from the oil upon him. I'm just guessing. No, Thursday night. Thursday night. Aliya of Yidden. Erev Shabbos Kedesh Bashas Matis Chov Dalet Tammuz. I don't know why there was a Fabreng. Maybe the Rebbe went to the oil. The bottom line, there was a Fabrengen the Thursday night before Shabbos Mevarchim Menachem. Tafshin Lamed Vav, and the Rebbe said a Ma'amarim Aileh Masei. And he said the same Ma'amir Thursday night, and he said the same Ma'amir Shabbos. And of course, you know, it goes back to the Alter Rebbe Kutoteda, Aileh Masei b'nei Yisrael, ויכתוב Moshe, מוצאיהם, למסעיהם, למוצאיהם. And just to give you a heads up, you know, I looked up, I found a place where I can find, the Rebbe must have said 7 or 8 Ma'amarim Aileh Masei. He said quite a few Ma'amarim Aileh Masei. But one of them is at Muga. One of the Ma'amarim Aileh Masei is Muga, but it's not self-evident, because the Ma'amir is the Ma'amir Lahov and Ninik Sefer Torah. The Rebbe made the siyum for the Sefer Torah L'Kabbalas Pnei Moshiach. Erev Shabbos Kedesh, Eile Yud Shvat, Friday, the day before Yud Shvat in 1970, Tafshin Lamed. And the Rebbe said a Ma'amir Lahov and Ninik Sefer Torah. But it's really an Aileh Masei Ma'amir with a beginning and an end about Sefer Torah. Of course, it makes sense. And of course, there's Eises Aksiva and Eises Hakika, as you're going to see, not in this Ma'amir, but in the next Ma'amir. It makes sense that the Ma'amir which is connected to Kabbalah's Moshiach would be a Ma'amir of Aileh Masei, because Moshiach is Me'evel Adin Yereche, right? You'll see soon inside that the Baal Shem Tov says that the entire history of the Jewish people is 42 Masois, and the last Masa is to be Mekabel Pnei Moshiach Tzedkeni B'Peil Mamish. So it's Me'evel Adin Yereche. So it makes sense that the Rebbe would say a Ma'amir, which is connected to the Sefer Torah of Kabbalah, the Moshiach, which is connected to the Membeis Masois, that throughout history we have Membeis Masois until we reach Me'evel Yadin Yereche, from which we go to the Gula Amitis Vashlema. So I'm just announcing this because this is a Mugadika Ma'amir that's printed in Sefer Maluk at Chelik Aleph in the old versions. I guess in the new versions, I don't know where they printed it. They probably either in Chelik Beis, which is Yeshvat, or in Chelik Gimel, which is Shavuos, when the Ma'amir was printed, the Rebbe edited the Ma'amir. It's in Chelik Beis or the New Malukats, I don't know offhand, but that's an Aileh Masei Ma'amir. So there's a bunch of them. The Teichen of the Ma'amarim is very similar. Here the Rebbe said 2 Ma'amarim, one Thursday and one Shabbos. And superficially, they're the same Ma'amir. But if you examine them carefully, they're 2 steps. Thursday night, the Rebbe says 1 step, and Shabbos, the Rebbe adds a 2nd step. In Shabbos' Ma'amir, there's more than one idea that you don't have in the Thursday night Ma'amir. We're learning the first one of the 2, the Ma'amir of Thursday night, the Mitzrayim, when there'll be an opportunity, and I'm not going to waste time. As soon as I have an opportunity, I will record the 2nd Ma'amir, and I record it, I'm going to edit it, I'm going to put it up. But there's a fundamental difference between the first Ma'amir Aileh Masei and the second Ma'amir Aileh Masei. But before I get to that difference, let me establish the foundation. The foundational idea of both of these Ma'amarim is in the very last paragraph of this Maimed on page 272. I'm going to be putting up my PDF with my scribble, as I always do. The last paragraph of the Maimed begins with these words: Vezehu Aliya of Masei b'nei Yisrael v'geimach ezehu chelek mitera loshen hira. That's the key, right? The Rebbe is obsessed with this idea. Teira miloshen hira. The Rebbe cannot accept that Teira hi nitzches, the eternal Teira, that Alpayim shad makad Teira le'elim, the Teira is 2,000 years before the world, and even higher than that, it's chamuda genuza, which is mamish, it's shashui hamelach batzmusei. The Teira is the Eibishter's plaything, and in the Teira you have mitzvahs, instructions, which teach us how to live. Hamaisa shayason ve'ela shaleisi asena, the actions that we must do and the actions that we're not allowed to do, b'chaya yemim, in our daily life. So obviously those are messages for us always. But then you have the stories in the Torah, as well as those things in Torah that for a variety of reasons are not l'deidis, like the Miluim in Pashas Tetzav and in Pashas Tzav, like Machzah Shekel, the way it's explained in Pashas Kisisa. And of course all the stories of the Torah, how are they part of an eternal Torah that's older than the creation itself, that's one with God Almighty, that gives the Eibush the greatest pleasure ever, if we have no use for them in our lives? So the tradition was that Maisa of is Siman Labanim. There it brings it here in conjunction. The next line, there it brings Siman Labanim, that it's a sign for the children. The Ramban explains this in the beginning of Pashas Lech Lecha, and throughout Bereishis, he shows you how the stories in the Chumash are a Siman, because each of those stories would happen again later to us historically, a similar story, and we need to have the Siman from what happened to the parents about how the children should react. That's what the Ramban says. The Rebbe is not comfortable with that pshat. Then there's a second madrega. It's the sinas Koach labanim. Not only is it a siman to the children, it's a sign how the children should react when they have in their lives events which are similar to Maisa Ovis. So they should know how to react. But it's in the sinas Koach. It empowers us. The fact that this happened to the Ovis first, and the Torah records it in Torah Shebeksav, and then it happens to us a second time. So A, we have a sign of what we're supposed to do, and B, we're empowered of how to do it. But the Rebbe is not even happy with that. Maaseh of Siman Labanim is not enough for the Rebbe, and Maaseh of Siman Unasinas Koach Labanim is also not enough for the Rebbe. The Rebbe doesn't settle until he finds the Zayar, Teira Miloshen Hira. Teira is a lesson, and I believe there's other sources besides for the Zayar. He brings the Radak to Tilim v'Oid, right? The Rebbe, he always quotes the Zayar. Here he quotes, footnote 44, quotes the Radak with Tilim, but the Zayar says it, the Rebbe always quotes it, that every single word of the Torah is an instruction in our practical lives, which is a very unique approach to the Torah, and it's the basis for hundreds of sichos, where the Rebbe would take ideas of the Torah that are wonderful ideas, they're beautiful, meaningful ideas, but they're theoretical. And he will say, if it's written in the Torah, it's not enough that it's a siman, it's not enough that it's in the Koach, it has to be a direct instruction to each of us, b'chol makom v'b'chol zman. So Aliya of Masei is the same thing, but the Torah in the end of Bamidbar, which in some ways is the end of the whole Chumash, because Sefer Devarim is Meishim Piatz Mekoshve, it's called Mishneh Torah, it's a lower level, it's a different level, begins with the enumeration of all the 42 stops that the Jewish people made from when they left Mitzrayim until they came to the edge of the Yarden. Crossing over the Yarden is really the 43rd journey, Mem Gimel, Gam. There's Mem Beis Masois, there's 42 journeys from the time the left Mitzrayim until they came to the precipice of going into Eretz Yisrael. So the first message of the Rebbe always is, you need to learn something, I need to learn something in my actionable life, my behavioral life from this idea, and that's really the unwritten question of this Maimed. What is it telling me to do practically in my daily life? That's Hakdama Rishoina. And of course there's so many Maimarim and so many sichos of the Rebbe that are predicated on this idea. In this case, the Rebbe doesn't even bother saying it. At the very end of the Maimed, he says the Hira. But in some places, the Maimed will begin with the question, why is it written in the Chumash? It's not Negei L'maaseh, Maida Hava Hava. The Rebbe will talk us through it in long form. Here, the Rebbe just says the Maimed. At the very end, he says, no, what's the lesson practically? And of course, throughout the Maimed, the Rebbe taught us that lesson. Having said that, let me tell you how I understand the difference between the Maimed the Rebbe said on Thursday night and the Maimed the Rebbe repeated the same Maimed on Shabbos. The difference is that on Thursday night, the Rebbe explains the Teira Milashon Hera from the Ma'amarim Aileh Masei as you need to say the Aliya. The neshama comes into this world, it has a job to do, and in doing that job it takes 42 journeys, and as a result of having done that job and made these 42 journeys, the neshama has an aliyah. That's the focus, on the neshama. In the next Ma'amar, which we'll learn in Mitzrayim, our next opportunity, the Rebbe adds one more little detail, which is the idea of Asida Eretz Yisrael Shetispashet B'chol Ha'aratzes. So he's no longer speaking about how the person has an aliyah, but how the world has an aliyah. And it seems to me that in the second Ma'amar, which we're going to learn next time, where the Rebbe speaks about the world having an aliyah, he's not talking about Avedas HaBirurim, he's talking about correction. He's talking after all the correction is finished. After all the correction is finished, when it's all perfect, everything is already metukun or mavurid and everything is in its place, then the world has an aliyah. So it's not, sometimes when you talk about the duality of Avodas Hashem, there's two things in Yiddishkeit. A, how it benefits the Jew, Neshama Yid Zud Tzedek Aliyah. B, how it benefits the world and the Guf and the Nefesh Abraham is the idea of Birudim, right? In this Ma'amar, it's not Aliyah versus Birudim, it's Aliyah versus Aliyah. Because it's Eilah Masei, it's talking about the end of the story when it's all over. In the first Ma'amar, he says, you go through the journey in the Midbar Amim, which is Avedas HaBirudim, and you complete it, and you come to the end, the Neshama has an Aliyah. And in the second Ma'amar, he adds, you go through the journey of the Ma'amrim Aileh Masei, the Midbar Amim, which is Avedas HaBirudim, and you come to the end, and the world has an Aliyah. So let's learn them one at a time. Dava Dibar Alefani, we're learning the first Ma'amar, and the first Ma'amar is going to speak to the idea of you need to say the Aliyah, and it's like I said, it's a classic Ma'amar with the standard questions, which goes all the way back to the Likutei Torah. And as I mentioned already, the Rebbe's Mugadika Ma'amar on this is the Lahav and Inyan Ksiv V'Seir Tavshan Lamed, which is 95% of it is Eilah Masei. Just the very beginning and the very end is about Sefer Torah, Eitzis Aksiv and Eitzis Chakika, which is going to come up also in the second Ma'amar here. And Zehachilaynu, let's go. And the Rebbe begins, again, I have no numbers, the Ma'amar is very short, I'm just going to go from the beginning to the end, and that'll be that. Eilah Masei B'nei Yisrael, these are the journeys of the Jewish people, the steps along the way. As the Jewish people exited from the land of Mitzrayim. And who enumerated all of these journeys? Moshe took Moshe and Aharon together to calculate, to sit down and to write down and to figure out and to remember where they stopped the 42 times over the course of the 40 years that the Yidden were in the Midbar. Now the word Masei could mean to stop, and it could mean to go. I think Rashi in Sefer Shmois says that the word Masa could mean where you rest and where you go. So the Lashon is, these are the journeys of the Jewish people as they're leaving Mitzrayim, that the calculating of the total of them all was done by Moshe and Aharon. And then in the subsequent Psukim, Mam Shechu Meini continues and he enumerates. It's called Amasais, all of the 40, Vayisu, Vayachanu, Vayisu, Vayachanu, or 42 different times. Mesa'iem, till the pasuk finishes Vayachnu V'geim and Aliya of Yidden base Hayeshimis, wherever they rested, by the Yarden, by the River Jordan. Bracket, because of all 42 of these journeys are listed one after the other, meaning you went through the Chumash already, from Shmais, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and as you went through the Chumash, you encountered in certain parshas more than in other parshas. You have a few of them in Parshas B'Shalach. You have a few of them in Parshas Ba'aloischa. You have a few of them in Parshas Chukas, right? And now you're holding Masei. And then in Sefer Dvarim it's going to be repeated, where the Jews stop and start over the course of the 40 years in the Midbar. But here, they're all collected one after the next. In other words, you don't have to figure it out for yourself. The Eibush is repeating, Biyad Moshe Biyad, and Moshe and Aharon are going to write down a summary of the entire collection of stops and starts of the Jewish people in the Midbar, after the Torah has already told us the story of these journeys, and in some of them in great detail, through the second and the third and the fourth Sefer of the Torah. And he adds, and our custom is that you don't interrupt. We read all 42, right? It's a very, very long Monday and Thursday Kriya, where often Matas and Masei are together. So in Mates and Masei together, you read Mates, which is also not the shortest Kriya. But if you do Masei separate, so you have to read all four. It's like 50 psukim. It's a Monday and Thursday reading, which is longer than some parashas. It's very long, and in many customs they only read a few of them. They don't read all 42. It's a Chabad custom not to stop. You read all 42 Masais, because it's like the Dayanos that says in Kisvei Rizal, don't stop in the middle of the Dayanos, go through all of them, don't interrupt in the middle. So you don't interrupt, you read the whole thing from beginning to the end, not just on Shabbos, but on Monday and Thursday as well. So they are collected in one place, and they're read uninterrupted as a continuum always, not just on Shabbos, but on Minchas Shabbos and on Monday and Thursday as well. Which indicates the idea that what I was trying to hint at is that there's no such thing as interrupting in the middle. They're one long story, which itself is an interesting idea. We know the kashas from the Rabbeim. Why I say these are the journeys in plural, which is a lashon of plurality, which includes subsequent to that, every single stop ad yad till they came to the edge of Eretz Yisrael, and they're all called journeys of leaving Mitzrayim. And the question is, Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is a physical place. It's a land. It has a geography, has a border. It was the very first exodus, the very first journey, when they traveled from Ramses to Sukkot. Ramses is in Mitzrayim, Sukkot is out of Mitzrayim, done. So it's not Elam Masei b'nei Yisrael, Sheyotzu Meretz Mitzrayim, Elam Masei b'nei Yisrael b'midbar, or Sheyotzu Meretz Mitzrayim, ad boyim aleres neshaves. But to call all 42 journeys as leaving Egypt is simply factually untrue. Only the first one was leaving Egypt. This is a classic question, and of course the answer is that Yetzias Mitzrayim is a spiritual thing also, not just a physical thing. Until you come to Eretz Teva Rachava, you're still going out of Mitzrayim. That's going to be the answer. That's the answer in many Ma'amarim. That's going to be the answer in this Ma'amar. Second question is, Mahu V'yichtiv Moshe. Why does Torah have to specifically say Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it down? And what does Moshe Rabbeinu write down? It's Moshiach, the places from which they departed. למסעיהם, to the places that they arrived. And then the pasuk repeats Ve'ela Mas'eihem. These are the places where they arrived. L'Moshiach, in relationship to the places that they left. So the shaila is that they call it Torah Kula. We know that the whole Torah Kadosh Baruch Hu Hashem spoke. Moshe case and Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, and the Rebbe Nitzayim took about Baba Basra, that Hashem dictated. Right? Sefer Dvarim is a little bit different, and even the Ramban, even here, the Ramban doesn't necessarily hold that it's much different. But the first four Sfarim, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu what the word he dictated. Hashem Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it down, and you don't have over and over again the Chumash V'yichtav Moshe. V'yichtav Moshe v'yikra Hashem Elov, right? V'yikra Elov Hashem, right? V'yichtav Moshe v'yidabra Moshe Leim is Chukas HaTorah. Why all of a sudden is it important to specify that Moshe wrote it down? He wrote everything down. It's a good question. Why, when it comes to the collection of all 42 journeys as they're one unit, and a unit that we speak in such a way that we never separate between them, why do you have to point that Moshe writes it? And the next question is, so the pasuk says V'yichtav Moshe Mitzrayim Masei, that he doesn't just describe where they came to, he describes the fact that they left and they came. Instead of saying Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the journeys, it says where they left from and where they came to. Why is that significant? And finally, moreover, first he says the places from which they left until the places in which they came. And then it says immediately thereafter, these are places that they came to from the places that they left. So it's written very poetically, and it's written in a reverse. First it says they left and they came, and then it says these are the places that they came to from the places they left. So there's two questions more. Why is it written twice? And number two, why is it in the reverse order? First L'Moshiach, L'mas'eihem, then Mas'eihem, L'Moshiach. These are the kashas of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is going to answer every kasha. Zis. It's not going to be, it's not a long mime, it's not hard, it's very sweet. The Rebbe is going to immediately go into answering the questions. But before he does, the Rebbe makes a statement. And this statement is the Aharon Avodah. This statement is the message to us. That the Torah is not just telling us a story, the Torah is telling us an instruction. And the Rebbe continues, V'hinei, the answer to the unwritten question of what's the Torah milashon hira, from recording the Masayos altogether, is that a Torah calls a pratis nemra, the way the Torah is written. And given, it's written in a way that it speaks in general and it speaks in specifics, meaning the Torah could say something one time and it can imply over a large unit of time. And then it could apply over a series of smaller units of time. Or it could apply in a particular situation, and then that particular situation can be radiated and retranslated into a variety of other specific parallels to the original. Then we then move on, which leads us to understand that the story of these journeys is not just a has-been, otherwise it wouldn't be Torah. Nit simen lebanim, nit nesinas keich lebanim, and sicher nit hira lebanim. But it is simen, it is nesinas keich, and most importantly, it's a lesson for us. Just like that generation that left Egypt. Should also members Masei they journeyed 42 stops from the time they left Egypt geographically until they came to the edge of Eretz Yisrael, the River Jordan, before they crossed. The same idea is also true the entire collection of Jewish history, from the birth of the Jewish nation, which is the 15th day of the month of Nisan in the year 2448, until there's Gals of Melech HaMashiach. It should be Tekef Miyad. It could be today. Dalet Tammuz Hey Tavshin Pei Beis Versporen alle nicht Geschmacke Sachen. The entire history is 42 journeys, and the same attitude and the same basic purpose and the same basic message that applied then applies to us always. And that's why it's a lesson, because we're still leaving Egypt spiritually, and if we're still leaving Egypt spiritually, we need to do the same thing that they did when they were leaving Egypt spiritually. They're also leaving Egypt spiritually, because the physical departure of Egypt is only first, and yet we call all 42 the departure from Egypt. So we apply the lessons and the instructions that the Eibishter gave them for that generation to our lives until the end of time. That Mitzrayim asked Mesa'im from the time we left Egypt. Until we come to the whole, to the true and whole and perfect and peaceful Geula. You also come to the edge of the River Jordan on the eastern bank before you make the trip across the Yarden, which is going to be the 43rd journey. And afterwards, you cross over from the eastern side of the Yarden to the western side of the Yarden. And the Rebbe adds in the bracket parenthetically. Now, this is connected to what the Rebbe said in the Ma'amarim Aileh. At the end of the Ma'amar, if you look in footnote 12, he's Mitzrayim into it, that there's three things. Number one, we get the 7 lands. Number 2, we get the 10 lands. And number 3, we get the Nachla Bli Mitzrayim, which you don't always have in the Ma'amarim. The 3 lands makes that Yisrael a time and a half its size, right? Instead of being 7, it's 10. 3 is a little bit less than half of 7. So you're adding about a third. But then when you say Nachla Bli Mitzrayim, this is an infinity. This is Uparatzta. So he says, the Eibishter broadens the borders. Number 1, Neisef al Kibush Edis Kenik Nis V'Kadmaini. That's obvious. But that's already a very significant thing. But in addition to that, there is the Nachla Bli Mitzrayim, which is beyond even the 3 lands. So when the words which is written about the Kenik Nis V'Kadmaini, the Rebbe reads into those words alone, not just the acquisition of the remaining 3 lands, but also the idea of Nachla Bli Mitzrayim. Moshiach is going to come, we're going to get a huge piece of land, we're going to have to use it in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, etc., 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 from the moment of the birth of the Jewish nation till the moment of the arrival of Moshiach Tzidkenu with Membez Masei, and until there's Gals of Mashiach, we're on that journey. So until there's Gals of Mashiach, so long as we're on that journey, the lessons of their lives during that generation speak to us as a lesson, not just as a simon, not just as a nesinas keich. So we have 2 parallels, right? Number 1, the generation left Egypt, spent 40 years traveling 42 journeys. Number 2, we're spending 3,300 and it's, how many years is it now? 34 years making the same 42 journeys. But then there's a 3rd and a 4th. Every single person in his or her life also has the 42 journeys, and here he's going to explain it in 2 different ways. Like it says in this seed there for the Mishnah, behold, each generation, a person has to see himself as if he left Egypt, like you say in that Gadol Shal Pesach from the Pasuk. A person has to say, Hashem took me out of Mitzrayim, the person has to say that I was taken out of Egypt. And we know that going out of Egypt is not freedom yet. You're not free until the bond is based on the call of insane. The commentators on your basic English, you bring carbonates. Which is the fifth lashon, because the dal the shayla shall gula is veitzes. Yes, chumtachas veitzes. If it's out of galti v'lakachti, this is going out of Mitzrayim till Eviyadan Yerechi, and then the fifth lashon is veivesi. How to move, and it's therefore understood last line on page 269. The journeys out of Egypt, I just saw every single generation. And he gives you two forms for it. Number one, we all know what the Baal Shem Tov teaches, and it's the source of it is the Degel Machne Ephraim, Shemesh is Man Chai Ha'adam, that the duration of a person's life. All of it, nobody is born until he says, B'yadcha af yedruchi Hashem Hu Elokim, for the last time, before the Eibush takes the Pekadon back forever. Nichlal v'nirmaz b'chol ha'mem Masei is included and hinted in the 42 journeys. Mirega sheneilad, from the moment the person is born, until there's the end of the days that the Eibush created for that person, which the person was given. So you have a third model. You have the Membeis Masei of the Jewish people from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. You have the Membeis Masei over the course of our entire history. The Membeis Masei, you have it over the course of an entire person's life. And now goes number 4. Every individual day. Which because of the Tanya adds to what the Mishnah said, B'chol derech v'derech adam. Liris is atzmi, and the Lashon Harambam is lahares is atzmi, kuyat seim shivud Mitzrayim, and after that ba'ad b'chol yem v'yem. Chayim chol, yem v'yem, chayim v'yem, liris is atzmi, kuyat yem shivud Mitzrayim. Every single day a person has to construe himself, has to be aware of himself. As if today he went out of Mitzrayim, Shem Yizeh Muvim Kanal, which teaches us, Shegam Inyan HaMembeis Masei, is that the idea of the 42 journeys and the lessons that apply Yeshnei B'chol Yem exist in every single day. Ba'vedas Kolachet, each person's day, which is dealing with the Teda V'kim Mitzvah. No moment you open your eyes that it's Yes Mitzrayim until you say B'yotcha Af Kedruchi, like the Rebbe is going to say in the end of the Maimer. And we get to Lichtach Shlofen Banacht V'ayid is the end of the Membeis Masei. So that's why the story is written in the Torah, because it's not just a Siman Labanim or in a Sinas Keach Labanim, it's a Hira Labanim. And it's Hira, but then a Klaus Pratis. Every single day we have the entire journey. Every single lifetime is the entire journey. And all of our history is the entire journey. So now what are the lessons? Once we know the instruction that we have to learn from what they did then, when they left Mitzrayim until they arrived at the edge, at the precipice, at the threshold of Eretz Yisrael, there's 42 steps and there's an avodah which must be done. Since those ideas apply to us, what is the message, practical message for us? And the Rebbe continues and he says, just like the first time, which we read the story in the Chumash as a has been. The journeys of the Jewish people during those 42 stops was B'midbar HaGadol V'Hanera, the great and awesome desert, Nachash sort of Akra, a place of all kinds of death from fire, like Sodov, and death from ice, like Akrav. There's a thirst, there's desolation where there is no water. And the Rebbe adds, the few stops before they went into the desert. But they're still considered part of the desert because they set up going into the desert. And the same is true. The few journeys after they came out of the desert at the end, they're all part of Midbar Ha'am. So the Rebbe says in Ikmei Kenhu, this is the application. This is the Hira and Avoida that every single Jew's entire life has to be construed as if it's living in the Midbar. It's a place of great danger. It's a place of great challenge. And we don't just survive it, we correct it, we heal it, we transform it, we do birurim, we fix it. Wait, so separate here. So the Hira, Teire Milashon Hira, is that every moment of our lives till Moshiach comes, we're in a desert. And we're not just trying to survive the desert, we're trying to be Mavada the desert. That's why the Torah tells us this story and insists on saying all 42 Masayos without an interruption, like the Rebbe said before, to teach us that from the very first step till the very last step we're going through Midbar Ha'amim and our avodas do avodas habirurim. That's point number 1. And then the Rebbe continues. Accordingly, whereas, in as much as it's true that our history and our life and our day is like journeying through a desert, not just to survive it, but to transform it and to lift it up. Tzrichim l'nesinas koach miyuchedes. We need help. Sheyuchlu la'aved es hamidbar, to be able to traverse through the desert. V'adarabah, we're not just surviving the desert, not just getting through it. La'seis imenu hachana, by going through the desert, it becomes the preparation la'achnis l'eretz teva rechava, to come into the land which is good and broad. Meaning, we're not just surviving the desert, we're elevating the desert, we're transforming the desert, and that's how we're zeichet to regula amitis v'ashleim. Says the Rebbe, Lazat tzarich li es vichtiv Moshe. That's why the Torah says Moshe has to write it, and that's the answer to the second question. Mitamol, that the whole Torah is written by Moshe, but all of a sudden the Torah specifies Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it, because Moshe's writing it is giving us a koach. You'll see on the bottom of the page, he'll explain how writing it is in a sinas koach. And what does he write? As mesa'iem lemas'ihem. He doesn't just write the journeys, he writes from where we came and to where we're going to. And he explains it up Chassidus, very beautiful. And you know this from the other Ma'amarim. How do this means? That when Moshe is writing, he is Moshe, Hemshech, l'neshama is begufim. Moshe is bringing down to the souls in their body as bechinas mesa'iem. Mesa'iem doesn't mean the physical, geographical location from which they came before they left to this new location. It means the sheidish haneshama l'mayla. Moshiach means from where the neshama came, למסעיהם, and it came down from Igra Rama Labira Amikta to travel through the desert, which means HaMeitzav HaMorka Shekol Yisrael, the source and the place from which the neshama is carved out, this yun. The machshavtan sheYisrael kodma l'chol davar, the thought of the Jewish people comes before everything, and of course the end of that sentence is even the thought of Torah. And by the way, in this Maimer Lechel, this is the Tzarech in Gadol, because the Rebbe is going to explain at the bottom of this page that Moshiach means only Torah, not higher than Torah, but Tzarech. Shezeh b'chinas Ak, u'lamayla yeseh pnimius Ak, the sheidish of the Shamas Yisrael, which is higher than everything, is Ak and pnimius Ak, and of course Atika, the Elam Gagalta the Ak, and Eitzeif Hamlubash B'Adlo, all these wonderful, glorious, highest levels. That's called Moshe. So Moshe has to write and draw down. He has to give us koach. We have to do our job. Moshe has to help us. And Vichhtov Moshe means he's revealing from the sheidish haneshama to the neshama malabeshes beguf. He should be able to do what it has to do. Through this fact, that in the neshama that is in his body, Moshe writes and draws forward from the mitzvah, from the sheidish haneshama, and which madreg in the sheidish haneshama here it says. The neshama can traverse the 42 journeys. So Vichtav Moshe doesn't mean he's writing down a story. Vichtav Moshe means he's bringing down a koach from the sheidish of the Shamas Yisrael to do the journey. Bracket bedug, just like we can explain it by parallel. The first time, before Moshe wrote, at the beginning of the 40 years, and Moshe is writing at the end of the 40 years. They say left that the Yidden travel with the Aharon ahead of them. And in the Aharon you have the luchas, which is called in Ashas Hashchina, which represents the Eibishter. It gives them koach to travel and to rest and to make a diddle barach b'tachtenim, which is amita singing a dirib b'tachtenim. The true idea of dirib b'tachtenim is Eibishter rests amongst them. So just like then, the Yidden didn't travel on their own. The Aharon went ahead of them, and there was Man Mechas Hagaveya and Magbiyas Hanomuch, like an Ashes and Chumash, and the Aharon made it easy for them to travel. In spiritual terms, the Aharon is the madreg of the Shamas Yisrael on the madreg of Chakika, the highest levels, and it gives us a koach to go through the desert and to be mavad in the desert. Shezeh, and this is the pshat Mitzrayim למסעיהם, that Moshe Rabbeinu brings forward from the sheidish of the Shamas Yisrael to the neshama, which is in a guf, that he should take this trip. First of all, ba'aveidas kol echad ve'echad, over the course of our lives, specifically b'chol yom v'yom, the Veda of each day. Moshe Rabbeinu brings forth a koach mar pnimius from the etzam from the pinta liyid. Yeshna keach l'kol echad ve'echad. Each one is given strength. We're taking his journey of these steps. To traverse the desert. To come to go like explained by Riches. I'm just throwing this in for fun. Hemshech which goes on this pasuk. Moshe writes this, because Moshe is the one who could bring Mamshech from the sheidish haneshama to the neshama malabeshes beguf. Now I want to repeat, there's a shtickle stila here. Earlier in this paragraph he wrote that Moshe Rabbeinu is Mamshech from the sheidish Shamas Yisrael, which is higher even than Torah. Now he's going to say that Moshe Rabbeinu is Mamshech from the sheidish of Torah alone, not higher. And being Mamshech, the Neshamas Yisrael sheidish, which is higher than the Torah, is actually later. It's mesa'ihem, mas'ihem is after we finish our avodah. And to me this is a stira. The beginning of the paragraph, the Rebbe writes that Moshe is Mamshech Mitzrayim Masei, the Aliya of Yidden, which is higher than every inyan. And now he's going to write Mitzrayim Masei is Mamshech from the Torah's highest source. And he explains. Moshe writes it all down. In this case, the Torah tells us Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, even though he writes the whole Torah, because the whole purpose is about writing it, he's bringing it forward. And he explains, Moshe's whole inyan is Torah. Like it says in the pasuk Zichur Teres Moshe Avdi, like the Gemara brings it, and the Rambam brings it also. The Torah is called Torah Sefer Moshe. And Moshe Rabbeinu writes and brings forward from the highest madregas of Torah, which you'll see in a moment is called ACS Hakika, that it should come down to levels of Torah which are closer to us, which is ACS Aksav. Well, then the inyan Torah, the whole idea of Torah is Hamshach, to bring down heaven to earth. Only through Moshe Rabbeinu, that his inyan is bringing heaven to earth. It brings down Etzem and Neshama with level of the Neshama, which is called Etzem, the way the Neshama is by itself. The regel shebe neshama, the foot of the neshama, which is the neshama weight, is in a goof. Ad man neshama fish and beches beguf lamata. It's in the body than in the physical world. Va'filu k'shaguf nimtzu b'midbar amam nachar sara va'akar v'tzimoyna ein moim. It's 4 levels. You're being mamshech from etzem and neshama to regel, and the way to slabish in a goof, and the goof itself, it's a midbar amam eretz sichem v'tzimoyna nachar sara va'akar v'tzimoyna sher ein moim. And Vichhtov, Moshe Rabbeinu has to write it. And he explains the Hine. Moshe is writing it and bringing it forward. The Torah has carved letters, like in the Luchas. The letters in the Luchas represent Keser. Not just Keser, but even Keser Lefnei Tzimtzum, because it's Chukim Mishnei Evreim, like it says in the Ma'amarim of Shavuos and Beyond and Samach Zayin. So they represent Sheidish HaNeshama. So Vayichtav Moshe as Mesa'iem means the Hainu. This means Hemshech, he brings down Mabchinas Eisias Chakika from the letters that are carved in the Sefer Torah, the Madrega of Luches, Lis Labish Be'eisias Aksavish, come down in the written letters, being revealed in the Neshama, which is Beguf. Shezehu Inyan Gimel Sefer Torah, because of Moshe, top 271. That Moshe Rabbeinu wrote 13 Sefer Torah, and then he passed away. And these Sefer Torah are not just the written versions of it; it's the Hamshacha from Chakika to Ksiv. So here also the Rebbe mentioned, second line from the bottom, Mitzrayim Sheidish HaNeshama, but L'cha'eda, since it's Vichhtov Moshe, and you'll see later the Rebbe wants to hold that when Moshe Rabbeinu brings down Mitzrayim Mas'ihem, and then through Avodah we go back to Mas'ihem, it's not the same, we go higher. And the way he's going to explain it in this Ma'amarim Pashtos, Mitzrayim Mas'ihem means from the Sheidish HaTorah to the Neshama Malabeshes Beguf. And Mas'ihem means higher Sheidish HaTorah, where the Yid is one with the Eibush higher than Torah. So therefore it's hard to understand why here he mentions the Sheidish of Neshamas Yisrael, when L'cha'eda the whole Vart is at this point, when Yid is coming into this world. And Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who writes down the Membeis Masois. He's bringing down from the Eises HaChakika to the Eises HaKsav, the union of Torah, not Neshamas Yisrael. V'tzarachi and God. But putting the question aside, and with this strength, the Jewish people go through the entire lives. When they successfully fulfill their mandate, to make this world known for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Oz at the first time, the first time around, they literally were told by the Eibush directly, get up and go, move from here and rest here. But we don't get such direct instructions, but spiritually the idea of Nanu is the same. And therefore the Rebbe continues and he says, that the avoid of each day, which has Membeis Masais, and the avoid of each lifetime, which also has Membeis Masais, the Eibishter is giving us instructions of where we have to go. And Moshe Rabbeinu is providing us the strength to go there by reaching the Sheidish HaNeshama, which L'cha'eda means the Sheidish HaTorah, and bringing Mamshech to the Neshama Malabeshes Beguf. So what do we have? We have 2 things. Number 1, Vichhtov Moshe. Moshe brings down a Koach from the Sheidish Neshamas Yisrael. But L'cha'eda, it's the Sheidish Neshamas Yisrael only as it's connected to Torah and not higher. As in it's Koach. Vichhtov Moshe, it's Moshiach Masei. Number 2, we journey. Life, right? Life. The Sheidish HaNeshama becomes connected to the Neshama. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's part of the Hemshech Samach Vav, but it's in Tafresh Samach Es Vayigash. It's the Maimed about Gvura, and you had the same Maimed by Vichitov, Reish and Beis, which is based on the Tzemach Tzedek in the middle of Rebbe. It's interesting Maimed. And when the Rebbe brings the idea of Ayipach, a neshama is very powerful, and the neshama in Gan Eden does not have access to its own power. It only uses as much power as it needs. The infinity of the neshama only emerges when the neshama is challenged, which is down here. Means that when the neshama comes into this goof, it's not only given access to the same power that the neshama has in Gan Eden, it's given access to a power that the neshama in Gan Eden doesn't know. And that's the ויכתוב מסעיהם למסעיהם. Moshe is bamshach from the shadish of neshamas. And again, l'chayda the word is that when Moshe does it at the beginning, it's from the shadish hatera and not higher. And then you gotta fight the good fight, right? Every day. Learn, daven, do mitzvahs. Basically, hanig behem din ger cheretz. Kol masecha yu l'shem shamayim b'chol derachecha de'ehu. To basically v'etzabirudim. And then you finish. And you complete it, right? What happens when you do birudim? I think I'm going to talk about it more in the next Maimed, but what happens when you do birudim? When you do birudim, you separate entanglement. There's a confusion, right? So there's two things to separating entanglement. Number one, there's peri and there's klipa. There's good and there's bad. There's fruit and there's junk which has to be thrown out. But there's another thing. That even the good is disorderly, it's displaced. It's like the pieces of a puzzle that are mushed up in a box that you have to rearrange and everything has to find its place. So first of all, you have to separate the good from the bad, and then you have to correct it. You have to put everything where it needs to be so that it should be orderly. And these are all steps in Biddur. Separating the good from the bad, raising the good up, placing it where it needs to be placed, right? And then it's finished. And when the birudim is completely finished, then obviously the beauty in the world is manifest, but the beauty in the neshama that accomplished the birudim is also manifest. And that's what the Rebbe says now, V'hine. Tachos hakavana, the end is, Sheti alam umata lamayla. That we finish the birur, which means you finish the journey through the desert, which is an exercise in separating good from evil, throwing away the evil and including the good, and then organizing the good, right? Like you cut diamonds out of a cave, out of a mine. You have to then study them, and you have to break them, and you have to cut them, and you have to polish them, and you have to set them. Each spark needs to go to its place, right? There's sparks all over the world that are displaced, and then they have to be retrieved, isolated, uplifted, and put where they belong in an orderly world, in a world that's called tikkun, order. And then this raised up, halam matalamayla. Which is the end of the story after the birudim are completed. Ve'ela, ויכתוב מסעיהם is the beginning of the story. The middle of the story is the journeys themselves. And ve'ela מסעיהם is going to be when you finish the whole process of birudim, you go back to the shadish hanasham, hanashadei amasai, through the journeys, nis'alo, the Yidden are raised up, ad lebchinas mesa'im, they go back to the shadish hanasham. But what are you going to say? The Gemara says, "Zovin v'zovin tagri ikri." If I buy for $1 and sell for $1, I'm not a merchant. If I buy for $1, I have to sell for $1.25, $1.20 at least, right? In the Shir of Einoah. So you cannot say that when you finish the Avodas HaBirudim in Midbar HaAmim, you go back to the same moitza, the same shadish haneshama from which the neshama came. What's the gain for the neshama? For the Eibishter, there's a gain, Birudim. But what about the neshama's gain? However, since the neshama within this world it must be that it's an advantage, not just an Eibishter, but it's an advantage to the neshama as well. You must say, therefore, Shahaliyahi, that when the neshama finishes its birudim and puts everything where it needs to be, and it has an ascent. It's lamayla mimakim, has to be above the place, shemisham hois ha'yidid, which the yidid came in the first place. Which leads us to a simple and obvious assertion and conclusion. That when it says that when you finish the journey, you go back to your shadish market, it's it has to be higher than the מסעיהם, the source of the neshama, which is the root from which the neshama is empowered by Moshe Rabbeinu's writing to do its mission. And when it's going back, it's going even higher. That when the neshama goes back to the Sheder Shamak at the end of the birurim, it's even higher from the bringing down initially through the Vayichtov Mesei from the root and source. That Misham Hayans in his Koach Laveras Hamasais. That gave us the power to do the journey. And when the journey is complete and we go back to Sheder Shamak, we're going back even higher. This is true not just historically and over the course of all the Jewish history, but it's true in the life of a person. This is true each day. That we start off our life, we start off our day by being connected to our Sheidish Neshama, and we finish our life and finish our day by going back to an even higher place. That the person's purpose is to make the world home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Hashem's gain, the bidur that the Eibishter benefits from. But then the neshama also gains as an Aliyah. And the Aliyah is lebechinas nalsiyos, to go back to even higher than the Sheder Shemak of the neshama, from which the neshama came in the first place. And the Rebbe finishes l'chein, which is why. And now the Rebbe says something interesting, and it gives Yagis latzikito. Every Jew, when at the end of his day he does a tabulation, a stock taking of his entire day. Supposed to make a cheshbon tzedek of the whole day, and before you give back to Eibush the Pikodim, the neshama which he gave us, we're giving him back to watch till the next morning. Like it says in the beginning, we give it to him ayefa and teruda, and he gives it back to us regua in the morning. We get it back a frish neshama, abgefrish. So before we give it away, we make stock of that day. Says the Rebbe is a cheshbon sameach with He makes it a fact. The cheshbon at the end of the day is happy and good. Now, is it true for me? I'm sure it's true for you, but this nisha they push it. Certainly a person works each day, and certainly if he worked each day, he's into a much higher place. To such a higher place, it's not just higher than he was before. It can't be called higher, because he's touching Atzmas Musneibishter himself, because he does Teda Mitzvahs. Teda Mitzvahs is Atzmas. So the Sheidish Neshama is very high. But the Sheidish Neshama, which is the Vayichtov Mesei, the beginning of the day, is the Neshama before Teda Mitzvahs of that day. So again, the Vayichtov Mesei, it's not higher than the Sheidish HaTeira. At the end of the day, you're going back even higher. And now the Rebbe makes a statement. Now, if I was writing this Maimir, I would take the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words and put them here. I would start V'hinei b'klolos. I would put it here. Because the Rebbe is going to say, L'cha'ira chidish gadol b'yeser. What's the seder normally of a person? You wake up in the morning, you say Meidani, and you daven. Davening is creeping out of bed, right? Asiya, Yetzira, Briya, Atzilas. Your Beis HaKnesses l'Beis HaMedrash. After you daven, you learn Torah. That gives you more koach. When Beis HaMedrash, Hanig b'hem min derech, you go out into the world and be Isaac and Avidas Abirurim, right? And then in the middle of the day, you stop for mincha. That's why the Chazal say, G'dei l'tfilas ha-mincha, sha'afilu eliyahu le'nena el b'tfilas ha-mincha, even though it's a shas shikros, but a yid stops in the middle of his birurim to daven to the Eibush that has a gewaldige meile. But then the day ends. When the day ends, you daven meile, basically kishmish halamito, and like to schlafen. And when you're going to sleep, you're going back to your Sheidish HaMokar. So the Rebbe says, Klolos ha'aliyah milmata lamayl ha'in avedas ha-tfilah. The idea that when we finish our birurim, we're reconnecting to the Eibush, this is davening. Now, this is not davening in the morning, because davening in the morning is part of revving up the engine. This is davening ma'ariv l'chayra. The Avedas HaTfilah he's talking about here is Kishmash Alamita and ma'ariv. You finish your whole day, and your day included Torah. Right? First you daven, then you learn, then you went to work, then your day was finished. You have a mincha in the middle, and mistama you learn in the evening. The end of your day is tefillah. The tefillah at the end of the day, this is going back to the Sheidish HaMokar and Neshama. So over here, when it says Avodas HaTfilah, it's not the way we normally understand tefillah in the scheme of daily life or in living in general. Because normally the davening is before the Torah, which is before going out into the world. This davening is after you finish. So that's one chiddush. But then there's an even bigger chiddush. Look at the next paragraph, which is why Aharon is involved. Moshe writes Mitzrayim Maseihem to bring down for the Sheidish HaMokar Neshama, which is not higher than Sheidish HaTeira, to give us Koach to the birurim. And Aharon is the tefillah at the end of the day, which brings us back to Asher Shemakar. In other words, in this Maimed, Aharon's avoid is higher than Moshe's. The work of the Masais is facilitated al Yidei Moshe v'Aharon Dafki, both Moshe and Aharon. Moshe gives us the Koach at the beginning, and Aharon gives us the Koach at the end. Moshe and Yana Shoshvin, the Malka Moshe is the Shoshvin, is the Unterfirik of the king. Hemshech Aileh Masei. He brings everything down from heaven to earth, which is close in Yenatera, which is the idea of Teda. Like I told you on the previous page, that even though the Rebbe keeps on saying Sheidah Shemakar and Neshama, Yichtav Moshe is bringing down Sheidah Shemakar and Neshama, but it's not hard in the Sheidah Teda. When you finish the Birurim, Aharon Yoneh, when you finish the whole work of the Avedas HaBirurim, and now you're ready to go back to Sheidah Shemakar, this is the tefillah of Aharon. Shoshvina the Maturnisa, he's the unterfitter of the Kala, that's us. Halam Mata Lamail, to raise us up from the bottom up. What was his job? Now, if you're talking about Aharon in Avodah, you should speak about Karbonis. But he doesn't. He lights up the 7 candles, which are going in the 7 different categories. Neshamas Yisrael, like it says in Chassidus, Kol Shivas Kniyam Neder Hainushamaylas Kol Echad Vechad MiYisrael. If you even see the 7 different branches, and when Aharon raises us up, he raises each one up in our own distinct way. And how does he raise us up? Until our fire goes up by itself. Moreover, not just the fire goes up, but it faces the face of the Meneda, translates the Rebbe, למוצאיהם, which is going back to Asher Shemakar. But as the Rebbe said in the previous paragraph, if the Neshama comes from its Asher Shemakar and comes down into this world, which is the Membeis Masois, and it goes back to the same place, where's the Yidid Tzedek Aliyah? So now the Rebbe answers, even higher than Teda. Teda is what Moshe Rabbeinu wrote. And in Teda, Moshe Rabbeinu is giving a koach to bring down the Sheidah Shemakar Neshama Laguf. And again, I'm saying it for the 5th or 6th time, and I'm not sure, but this is the Chayda Davana. The way it's Mushish and Teda, not higher than Teda. And when the Birurim are complete. And in the next Maimah, you'll see that the world has an Aliyah. But in this Maimah, we're seeing that the Neshama, when it finishes, when the Neshama has an Aliyah, goes back to Hadashir Shemakar higher than Teda. And the Rebbe brings the classic idea of Vezehu, like it says in Sfarim. The Dov, the Teda Shemakar Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? What does it mean connecting the Teda to the Eibush? The Reisa Kodesh Baruch Hu Kol Achad. And of course, the answer is Teda is Eid, Teda is Chachma, and David is an Neshama. It says the Mekivan She'ela L'mayla Me'ateda. Since a Yid, since David HaMelech goes up above the Teda, Harei Mechaber as a Teda Ima Kadosh Baruch Hu, he connects Teda with the Eibush. So Moshe, Vichhtov Moshe, it's Ve'ela Masei, he brings down the Sheidah Shemakar and Neshama, which is the same level as Teda, not higher. And Vichhtov Aharon, which is the Shoshvina de Matronitza at the end of the Birurim, we goes back even higher than the Sheidah of the Teda, which makes Tefillah higher than Teda in this Maimer, and it makes Aharon higher than Moshe in this Maimer, which is interesting. And the Rebbe concludes, last line on page 271. V'chein hu, and the same is also true, gam also b'aveidas shalachad v'echad miYisrael, the work of each one of us. And here he says something which should make you very nervous. The Eid b'tchilas hayom, as soon as the day starts, tzorach li yisbarach b'teilah tchilah, we say berachas HaTeirah. Now, in the beginning of the day, Moshe is writing the Torah, bringing down from Eis Zechakika to Eis Zaksiva, that from the Sheidah Shemakar HaTeirah is giving us the Koach to do the Avodah. Baruch Hu b'Teirah tchilah, berachas HaTeirah means that Yidden are higher than the Torah, and they're connecting the Torah to the Eibishter, which should be at the end of the day. So the Rebbe, but you start the day off that way. Before we even did the Avodah, we already have the Koach, not just to be Bamshech from Mitzrayim Maseihem, but to be Maileh from Maseihem to Mitzrayim by making the brachol Hamshech B'Minetz Natera. With the Chayre Tzarech Biyah, the Chayre, if you go through the life and the end of the life, the Yidid happens, results in an Aliyah, so the Baruch B'Teirah Tchilah should be at the end. Says the Rebbe, somehow we have the Koach for that in the beginning as well. The rest of the day, we've already done some of the Birurim. So we're entitled to some of the Aliyah. If we're entitled to some of the Aliyah, we're entitled to make Berachas HaTeirah, to Mamshech Beis Natera in the Teirah, to whatever degree we're in during the course of our day. And of course. But when the day is over, when the life is over, and you reach the Madrega B'Yadcha Af Gedruchi, you're giving back the Eibishter the Pikadon. And the Ma'amarim Aileh Masei, when you go to sleep at night, the neshama goes to Gan Eden to draw life, which is to being returning to the Mitzrayim, to the Sheresh Makar Neshama. But you're going even higher than the neshama was when it left in the morning. In the morning, you brought down from Sheresh Makar Teira, and now you're bringing down from the Rebbe called in the middle of paragraph on 271. Eini begeder makam umayla atzmusim husi yizbarach. Because of the Teira and mitzvahs that we did, and the way it translates as the Wakasha Teira mit Nesna Teira. Right? So at the end of the day, certainly you can be Baruch HaBatchela. You can bring a Baruch into the Teira, add the Eibishter to the Teira. And of course, as long as you're in the middle of your life, and you're talking about the Membez Masois of a specific day, so there's Vayichtov Meseihem Lemesa'iem. You get a Koach from the Sheresh Makar Neshama, which is the same as the Teira, to do the avoid of that day. And at the end of the day, there's going to be tefillah, there's going to be Aharon, that you Vayichtov Aharon. I'm putting words into the Chumash. Mas'ihem Lemutza'ihem, even higher, to be Mamshech, the Eibishter, with the Nesna Teira, into the Teira, and the next day it starts over. Tomorrow you'll renew your work on a level of complete Chiddush, just like when the moon disappears, and the next moment it's a Moilad Chodesh, it's a brand new moon. The same is true each night. We go to sleep, the neshama goes to Gan Eden, goes back to Mitzrayim, and the next day it starts the same thing over on a higher level. The next day, when the morning, Moshe Rabbeinu Vichtav Mitzrayim, Lemasa'iem, it's Mamshech from the new Sheresh of the Makar of the neshama. The way the Teira is even higher, because it's been united with the Eibishter yesterday. And at the end of the day, you have a tefillah, you have a Aved of Aharon, which is Mamshech an even higher, which raises you up to an even higher madrege of the neshama being higher than the Teira and being Mekadosh Teira Shema HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rebbe finishes. And this is Ve'ela Masei B'nei Yisrael. All of these journeys are for all of us. And that's a chelek mitei, a lashon hera. I put it in a box. It's part of the Teira, which is a lesson. Because it happened to our fathers. So first of all, it teaches us when we have similar events, know what to do. Second of all, it gives us koach to do the avodah l'banim. But most importantly, it's a lesson in every minute of our life, from the moment we're born as a nation till Moshiach comes. As we depart from our narrowness and our limitations. After the very first journey, which is from Ramses to Sukkot, which is the geographical departure from Mitzrayim. Still, Mascheles begins, you ascend from strength to strength, madreg from step to step. And therefore you're constantly leaving Mitzrayim, because although geographically you're out of Mitzrayim, spiritually you're in Mitzrayim, until you come to Eretz Tei B'Rechav, Eretz Avachal B'Dvash. Shezehu Masei Loshen Rabim. That's the answer to the first question. That was Masei Loshen Rabim. Because you're constantly going out of Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe answered every question. He answered why it says Eile Masei Loshen Rabim. He answers why it says Vayichtov Moshe. He answers why it says Moshiach Maseihem, and why he says it twice. First Moshiach Maseihem, and then Moshiach Maseihem. And he also threw in the Yad Moshe V'Aharon. And then the Rebbe says, V'achaboyim le'ever Yarden. You come to the precipice, to the threshold of the Yarden. You cross over the Yarden to the other side, and this is, in my imagination, it's the Masa Mem Gimel. I never saw this in my Mercedes, but theoretically, it's the 43rd journey. The idea of the Yarden is which is Birurim, with the whole process of Avodas Birurim. And crossing over the Yarden means you can finish with Avodas Birurim, and now you're on a higher level altogether, I think. And when you cross over the Yarden, you come into the land which is good and broad. It means bepashtos. The Bozechet to the Gula Mitzvah Vashleim, and coming into Yisrael Daidei Shayim Mekel Tishmo. We listen to Hashem today. When we serve the Eibishter Madrega of Amelim Bateid and Madrega of Eisei Chakika. Ves mitzvahs, we guard his mitzvahs, when we create them and we do them, we come to the true and whole and perfect and peaceful Gul. When it comes to the Rambam, the Rebbe quotes the Rambam, which he quoted so many times, of Ticha, Teira is a guarantee from the Teira. First you have to do tshuva. And tshuva means you have to be separate and reunite. This is the ויכתוב מסעיהם למסעיהם. And then only afterwards, ואלה מסעיהם למוצאיהם, that's already a tshuva if you don't do any averes. And Yisrael, tshuva, the Jewish people do tshuva miyad, and they're going to redeem miyad. Moshiach tzidkeinu, she goes on a bekorav. The Rebbe finishes with the nusach that we say in Shabbos Mevorchim. This was a maimer the Rebbe said on Thursday night, but he used the nusach of Shabbos Mevorchim because upon him the Rebbe said this maimer as an erev Shabbos, as a chana to the Shabbos Mevorchim. So again, the nekud of this maimer is not the birudim, it's the schara birudim, right? The nesinas keach birudim of ויכתוב מסעיהם למסעיהם. And the schar for birudim is Eila Masei למוצאיהם. You go back even higher than the Shedish of Mokir, which the neshama came. And the difference is when Moshe Rabbeinu writes, this is called Torah, and not higher than the Torah. And when the Yidden go back to the Shedish of Mokir, this is the Koach of Aharon HaKohen. This is called Tefillah, but this Tefillah is even higher than Torah. Shabbos, the Rebbe said the same maimer again, very similar ideas. You'll see it. I'll teach it. You'll see it. The same ideas. But he doesn't speak about the Aliya of the Neshama Yisrael. He speaks of the Aliya of the whole world. Again, I don't think that that's birudim. It's also Aliya. That's the second Aliya, not just Aliya and Yidden Aliya in the ganze Welt.